The courtroom silence. The echo of footsteps filled the grand courtroom. Hey, my beautiful family, welcome to a story, a day. I bring you powerful and deeply loving story. Subscribe, please. The heavy wooden doors creaked open. My son Ethan walked in first, head slightly bowed, shoulders stiff, dressed in the same gray suit he'd worn on his wedding day. But today, it looked like armor barely holding together a broken man. Behind him, his lawyer whispered directions. But Ethan's eyes were lost somewhere else, maybe in the memories of laughter that once echoed in his home. And then, she entered. Amelia, my daughter-in-law, once the heart of our family, now the storm that tore it apart. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as if each step was a reminder of the distance she'd created between love and hate. She looked radiant, polished hair, red lipstick, a navy blue dress, confident, unbothered, and cruelly beautiful. She smiled when she saw him. But it wasn't love anymore, it was mockery. Still wearing the same tie, Ethan? She sneered softly, just loud enough for the court clerk to hear. Guess some things never change, like your weakness. Ethan froze. His jaw tightened, but he didn't reply. He just walked to his seat quietly, his fingers trembling as he adjusted the papers in front of him. I was a few steps behind, unseen yet. The moment I entered that courtroom, I felt the chill, not from the air conditioning, but from the invisible wall between them. A marriage that had once been built on trust was now a battlefield lined with accusations and scars. Suddenly, flashback, the breaking point. 2 years ago, Amelia was like the daughter I never had. She would visit every Sunday, help me water the garden, laugh at my son's terrible cooking, and hug me tightly before leaving. But when Ethan's business started to collapse, everything changed. He had poured his savings into a startup and lost it all in a single bad investment. He was ashamed, but Amelia, she couldn't stand the fall from luxury. Arguments grew, nights became silent, and love turned into resentment. Then one day she left, taking not just her things, but every trace of warmth from Ethan's life. The next time we saw her was through a lawyer's letter. She was suing him for defamation, emotional abuse, and financial deceit. It was a lie, but lies told beautifully can destroy the truth. Suddenly, back to the courtroom. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The room fell into absolute silence, except for the faint click of Amelia's nails tapping the table. Case 431, Amelia Carter versus Ethan Carter, the clerk announced. Ethan's name echoed like a wound being reopened. As the trial began, Amelia's lawyer, a slick man in his 40s, began painting Ethan as a manipulative husband who emotionally cornered his wife and left her penniless. I saw Ethan's hands trembling under the table. When it was Amelia's turn to speak, she stood, poised, confident, venomous. Your Honor, she began, her voice smooth as silk. I married Ethan out of love. But soon I realized love can't survive lies. He promised me a life, a future. Instead, he gave me shame. He hid debts, lied about his business, and blamed me when everything fell apart. Every word she said felt like a dagger aimed not only at him but at me. Because I had watched their love begin, I knew the truth. Ethan hadn't lied. He had protected her from the truth until he couldn't anymore. When Amelia finished, she looked at him, that same smirk curling on her lips. Tell me, Ethan, she whispered as the courtroom paused between testimonies. Still pretending to be the victim? He didn't answer. His eyes glistened, not from anger, but from the unbearable ache of being misunderstood by the one person he once trusted most. Suddenly, the walk behind him. During a short recess, Ethan stood and walked toward the hallway. I followed him silently. He didn't know I was there. His shoulders looked heavier than I remembered. He stopped near the window, staring at the gray sky outside. For a long time, he said nothing. Then softly, as if confessing to the air, he whispered, Dad used to say love can heal everything. I wish he were here to tell me what to do when love becomes your enemy. My heart cracked a little. I wanted to reach out, to put a hand on his shoulder. But before I could, the bailiff called everyone back inside. We walked back, him first, me behind. The courtroom doors opened again, and this time, my footsteps echoed louder than before. Amelia turned slightly, mid-conversation with her lawyer, when her eyes caught sight of me, walking slowly behind. Ethan. The color drained from her face. Her confidence faltered, just for a moment. And that's when the judge noticed too. He was about to speak, mid-sentence, when his gaze shifted toward me. He paused. There was something in the air, a ripple of recognition, a silent command for respect. The courtroom went still. The judge leaned back in his chair, eyes moving between Ethan and me. Mr. Carter, he said carefully, I didn't realize your father was present. Amelia blinked, confused. Ethan looked back, finally seeing me standing behind him. His eyes widened with surprise and pain mixed together. "I'm here," I said quietly. My voice carried through the room, low but steady, because truth doesn't belong to one side of a story. The judge nodded slowly, his tone softening. "Then perhaps, Mr. Carter, we'll hear a different truth today." Suddenly, Amelia's mask slips. For the first time, Amelia seemed unsure. Her smirk faded, her hands fidgeted. With the ring she'd stopped, wearing months ago but still, carried in her bag, maybe out of guilt, maybe pride. When Ethan took the stand again, his voice cracked, but there was honesty in it. "I failed in business," he said, "but I never failed in love. I tried to shield her from my struggles. She called that deceit. Maybe I should have told her sooner, but all I wanted was to protect her from my failures. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I loved her." His words weren't dramatic, they were raw, real. Amelia looked down, blinking fast. For a split second, she looked like the woman who once waited for him at the train station in the rain, bringing him coffee and warmth. But then pride took over again. She straightened her back and turned to the judge. "Love doesn't excuse lies," she said coldly. "No," I said from behind, unable to stay silent. "But hate doesn't excuse cruelty." The courtroom fell silent again. The judge's eyes softened. "Mr. Carter Sr., please sit, but you may speak. I think the court needs to hear what you have to say." Suddenly, the father's words. I stood slowly, my cane tapping lightly against the floor. "I'm not a lawyer, Your Honor," I began. "I'm just a father. A man who watched two young hearts fall in love under the same roof. I built with my hands. I've seen what real love looks like, and I've seen what pride can destroy." I looked at Amelia. She avoided my eyes. "My son is not perfect. He made mistakes, as all men do, but he never lied to hurt. He lied to survive. He lost everything except his dignity, and that's something no court should take from him." Amelia's jaw tightened, but tears welled up in her eyes. The judge listened quietly, pen resting on the paper. Then he said softly, "We'll adjourn for today." The gavel hit the desk once, sharp and final. Amelia stood frozen. Ethan exhaled, his body trembling with relief and exhaustion. As the courtroom emptied, I walked up behind him and placed my hand on his shoulder. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine. "I didn't know you'd come," he whispered. "I couldn't let you walk through this alone," I said. "You've already walked through enough." He closed his eyes and leaned into my hand like a child who'd finally found home after a long war. The testimony. The morning sun spilled through the high windows of the courthouse, painting long golden stripes across the marble floor. The city outside buzzed with its usual noise. Cars, horns, footsteps. But inside, everything felt heavy. I could feel it in the air the moment I stepped in with Ethan again. The tension, the whispers, the unseen eyes. People had read about the case in the papers now. The mocked husband, the cold wife, the broken businessman. Everyone loved a tragedy when it wasn't theirs. Ethan walked ahead quietly, clutching a worn brown file, the last of his business records. His lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, followed beside him, calm but visibly worried. When the courtroom doors opened, Amelia was already there. She didn't turn around immediately, but when she did, her eyes met mine. For the first time, her gaze wasn't sharp. It was uncertain. Maybe because yesterday, she'd seen something she hadn't expected. The man who raised Ethan. The man who still stood behind him when everyone else walked away. Suddenly, the judge returns. "Court is now in session," the clerk announced. Judge Henderson entered, adjusting his glasses as he looked over the crowd. There was a strange quietness in his tone today, as if yesterday's moment still echoed in his mind. He looked at me briefly, then at Ethan. "Mr. Carter," he said softly, "we'll continue from where we left off. You may call your next witness." Mr. Reynolds stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Mr. Ethan Carter Sr. to the stand." A ripple went through the courtroom. Even Amelia's lawyer looked momentarily surprised. I took a deep breath and walked forward. The bailiff helped me up to the stand. The wood felt cold under my hand as I took the oath. "I swear to tell the truth," I said, my voice echoing faintly. "Suddenly, a father's truth." Mr. Reynolds smiled gently. "Mr. Carter, could you tell the court what you've witnessed between your son and Mrs. Amelia Carter over the years?" I nodded slowly. "I saw love first," I began. "The kind that makes two people believe they can survive anything. My son was always quiet, thoughtful. Amelia, she brought light into his life. But light, when mishandled, can burn too." Amelia's eyes flickered. "Ethan started his business with good intentions," I continued. "He wanted to build something lasting. When the company collapsed, he didn't tell her immediately. Not because he wanted to lie, but because he wanted to fix it before it broke her heart. But life doesn't give you that chance sometimes. I paused. My throat tightened, but I kept going. When she found out, she left. Not because of the failure, but because of the fear of living without comfort. That's not cruelty, Your Honor. That's fear disguised as pride. Amelia's lawyer rose. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. Judge Henderson raised a hand. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Carter. I looked at Amelia directly. I'm not here to destroy her, I said. I'm here because truth shouldn't suffer just because pride speaks louder. For the first time, her eyes dropped. Suddenly, the video evidence. Mr. Reynolds approached the bench. Your Honor, we have new evidence. Messages exchanged between the couple. And a video from the night Amelia left the house. Amelia stiffened. Her lawyer whispered something urgently, but the judge gestured to continue. The screen flickered to life. It showed Ethan standing at their doorstep, drenched from the rain, begging her not to leave. His voice cracked as he said, "You don't have to stay because of money, Amelia. Stay because we still have us." Amelia's voice, cold, trembling, replied, "There is no us if you have nothing left to give." The court went silent. Ethan bowed his head. I could see the pain in his eyes. Not anger, just the exhaustion of reliving the moment that broke him. Amelia wiped her eyes quickly, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Suddenly, the judge's question. When the video ended, Judge Henderson spoke softly. "Mrs. Carter, would you like to respond?" Amelia took a deep breath and stood. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking. I said those words, and I'm not proud of them, but I was angry, hurt. I thought he'd ruined us. I didn't know how to stand by him without feeling like I was falling too." The judge studied her carefully. "You accused him of emotional abuse. Do you still stand by that?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. For a long moment, the courtroom waited. Finally, she said softly, "No, he never hurt me. He just stopped believing in himself, and I couldn't handle watching him fade." Ethan's head jerked up in surprise. The room whispered again. Her lawyer tried to intervene, but she silenced him with a trembling hand. Suddenly, the emotional breakdown. It was as if years of bitterness suddenly cracked open inside her. "I mocked him," Amelia whispered. "Yesterday I mocked him again, because I didn't know how else to face what I'd done. Every time I saw him quiet, I mistook it for weakness. I didn't see that he was trying to stay strong for me." Her voice broke. "I wanted the court to see me as the victim so I wouldn't have to admit I was wrong. But seeing his father behind him yesterday, it reminded me what loyalty looks like." Tears rolled down her cheeks, silent, unstoppable. Ethan's lawyer exchanged a glance with me. None of us expected that. Ethan stood slowly, his voice quiet. "Amelia, you didn't have to destroy me to prove you were hurt." She looked up at him, eyes swollen. "I know, and now I don't know how to undo it." Suddenly, a pause for humanity. Judge Henderson cleared his throat. "The court will take a brief recess," he said softly. "Some wounds deserve a moment of silence." The gavel struck once. As everyone stood, Amelia sank into her chair, covering her face. Ethan didn't move. He just stared at her, torn between forgiveness and the weight of everything she'd said. I walked up to him quietly. "Son," I said gently, "sometimes the truth doesn't need to win. It just needs to be heard." He looked at me, eyes red. "Do you think she means it?" I sighed. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just the first time she's hearing herself honestly." Outside the court. We stepped outside during the recess. The air was cool, and the courtyard was quiet. A few journalists stood nearby, scribbling notes, snapping photos. But I ignored them. Ethan sat on a bench beneath a tree, staring at the ground. "Do you remember when Mom was sick?" he asked suddenly. "Yes," I said. "She always asked for you first." He smiled faintly. "She told me once, 'Don't marry a person for who they are when everything's fine. Marry them for who they are when everything falls apart.'" I thought. Amelia would be that person. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe she still can be. People break differently, son. Some rebuild, some run." He looked back at the courtroom doors. "She ran. But today, maybe she's turning around." The final return. When the court resumed, Amelia looked calmer. Her lawyer whispered, but she shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "Let me speak." The judge nodded. She turned toward Ethan. "I can't take back what I said, or what I did, but I don't want to keep fighting. If the court allows, I'd like to withdraw my case." The entire room gasped. The judge leaned forward. "You're certain, Mrs. Carter?" "Yes," she said, "because I realized something. I didn't come here for justice. I came here for revenge. And revenge never fixes anything. It just keeps the wound open. Ethan sat frozen, unsure how to react. Judge Henderson nodded slowly. Request noted. The court will deliberate and decide accordingly. But I will say this. He looked at both of them. This is not a courtroom story. This is a story of love that forgot how to speak. I hope you both find your voices again, outside of these walls. He struck the gavel. Court dismissed. After the verdict, as people began to leave, Amelia approached us hesitantly. Her makeup was smudged, her voice soft. Mr. Carter, she said to me, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have mocked him. Or you. I just didn't know what to do with my pain. I looked at her kindly. Pain isn't evil, Amelia. It's only dangerous when you turn it into punishment. She nodded, tears welling up again. I don't know if Ethan will ever forgive me. I smiled faintly. Forgiveness isn't a gift we give others. It's what sets us free. She looked at Ethan, who stood a few steps away, silent. Their eyes met. No words were spoken, but something shifted. Maybe not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The father's reflection. That night back home, I sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. Ethan joined me silently, sitting beside me the way he used to as a child. Dad, he said softly, I thought today would destroy me, but somehow it saved me. I smiled, because truth always saves, son. The letter she never sent. The rain came softly that night. Not a storm, not a drizzle, but the kind that feels like forgiveness falling from the sky. It had been 3 weeks since the court case ended. The silence between Ethan and Amelia had stretched across days like a fragile thread, neither broken nor mended, just there. Ethan had gone back to working part-time at a small accounting firm. He was rebuilding, quietly, patiently. But sometimes, when I caught him staring at his phone late at night, I knew who he was thinking about. And somewhere across town, Amelia sat in her apartment, alone, surrounded by papers, a half-packed suitcase, and a heart full of things she didn't know how to say. That's when she began to write the letter. The letter, unsent words. Dear Ethan, you once told me that truth has a way of surviving even after love dies. I didn't believe you then, but now, after everything, I see it everywhere, in the silence, in the guilt, in the way your father looked at me that day in court. I lied not because I hated you, but because I hated myself. I thought I deserved more. More comfort, more respect, more attention. When you started to fall, I couldn't stand seeing myself fall with you. So I blamed you. I mocked you. I turned our love into a weapon. And when I saw your father walk in that day, everything broke inside me. I saw what loyalty looks like. I saw what I had thrown away. Do you remember the little cafe where we first met? You spilled coffee on my white dress, and you couldn't stop apologizing. I laughed so hard I cried. That's the moment I fell in love with you. Not because of the coffee, but because of the way you looked terrified of hurting me. I wish I could go back there, to that moment, before we started breaking each other. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I needed you to know that everything I said in court wasn't the truth of my heart. The truth is, I still care. I always will. Love doesn't die, Ethan. It just hides behind pride. Amelia. She folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope, but never wrote his address. She left it on the table and walked to the window, watching the city lights flicker below. She whispered to the night, He'll never read it, and maybe that's what I deserve. A chance encounter. The next morning I went to the market. The sky was gray, and people hurried past with umbrellas and worries of their own. As I turned down a narrow lane, I saw a familiar figure standing outside a bakery. It was Amelia. She looked different. No makeup, no bitterness, just tired eyes and a paper bag clutched in her hands. She froze when she saw me. Mr. Carter, she said softly, I didn't think you'd recognize me. I smiled faintly. It's hard to forget the woman who once made my son laugh like a fool every Sunday morning. Her lips curved in a faint, sad smile. He used to love my pancakes. He still does. Gently. Only now they come out burnt. She laughed, a sound that felt both foreign and familiar. Then she hesitated. Is he okay? I nodded. He's learning to be. She swallowed hard. Good, he deserves peace. There was a silence between us, not cold, just heavy with everything left unsaid. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. I wrote this for him, she said, but I don't think I can give it to him. Maybe you can decide if he should see it. I took it slowly, my fingers brushing against hers. The paper felt warm, like it still carried her heartbeat. I'll see what's right, I said quietly. She nodded once, turned, and walked away. Into the drizzle. Into her own kind of exile. The father's dilemma. That evening I sat in the living room, the letter on the table in front of me. Ethan was upstairs, typing something on his laptop. He looked calmer these days, but the calm of someone who'd learned to live with ache, not overcome it. I picked up the envelope and weighed it in my hand. If I gave it to him, it might reopen the wound he'd just started to heal. If I didn't, it might keep him wondering forever. Truth and mercy rarely walk hand in hand. I closed my eyes and remembered the courtroom, the pain in Amelia's voice, the honesty in her tears. Then I remembered Ethan's broken whisper. "Do you think she means it?" I stood up. Maybe it was time he found out. The letter delivered. Ethan was sitting at his desk when I knocked. "Come in," he said absently without looking up. I placed the envelope in front of him. He frowned. "What's this?" "Something you need to read," I said simply. He turned it over. No address, no name. But the handwriting, he recognized it instantly. His breath caught. "It's from her." He hesitated for a long moment before opening it. His eyes moved slowly over every line. As he read, I saw his face change. Confusion, pain, then something softer. When he reached the end, he didn't say anything. He just stared at the paper, his fingers trembling slightly. After a while, he whispered, "She still remembers the cafe." I nodded. Some memories never leave. They just wait for forgiveness to find them. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "Do you think she really meant it, Dad?" I looked at him. "Yes, but that doesn't mean you have to take her back. Forgiveness and return aren't the same thing." He smiled faintly. "I know, but maybe I needed to hear her truth, even if it came too late." A quiet visit. 2 days later, Ethan asked if I wanted to go for a drive. We drove through the outskirts of the city, until we reached the old cafe, the one from their story. It was still there, tucked between bookstores and flower shops. Inside, nothing had changed. The same wooden tables, the same smell of roasted coffee beans, the same soft jazz music playing in the background. Ethan sat at their old table and looked out the window. "She used to sit right there," he said, pointing to the corner where the morning light hit perfectly. "Maybe you should write her back," I said quietly. He smiled sadly. "No, some letters aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to be felt." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter again. Then, carefully, he tore it in half. Not out of anger, but release. The pieces fluttered into the small trash bin beside the table. "She doesn't need to know I read it," he said softly. "She just needed to write it." I nodded. "And maybe you needed to let it go." He looked out at the street where the rain had started again. "Yeah," he whispered. "Maybe that's love too, knowing when to stop holding on." Across the city, meanwhile, Amelia stood at her apartment window, watching the same rain fall. She didn't know if Ethan had read her letter, and maybe that was for the best. But she smiled anyway, a small, bittersweet smile. Because even if forgiveness never came, at least the truth had. She whispered, "Goodbye, Ethan," and closed the curtains. The father's reflection. That night I wrote something in my old journal. Something I hadn't written in years. Love isn't proven in courts or sealed with promises. It's proven in how gently we let go when holding on starts to hurt more. My son learned that today, and maybe so did I. 6 months had passed since the trial. Spring had turned the city green again, and the air no longer carried the taste of sorrow that once clung to our house. Ethan had settled into a new rhythm. Early mornings at work, quiet dinners at home, long walks on weekends. The wound was healing, though a faint scar still lived behind his smile. I often found him reading on the porch, sunlight washing over the pages, his coffee untouched as if he was waiting for something that never came. He never mentioned Amelia, but sometimes I'd hear him pause when a certain song played on the radio, the one from their wedding. That silence said enough. Then, one Friday evening, the doorbell rang. The visitor. I opened the door expecting the mailman, but standing there, beneath the soft drizzle, was Amelia. Her hair was shorter now, her face pale but calm. She wore a simple gray coat and held a small box in her hands. For a second, I thought I was seeing a ghost. A piece of the past suddenly made real again. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, her voice trembling. I hope this isn't a bad time." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to protect Ethan from reopening old wounds, but another part saw the sincerity in her eyes, a weight she'd carried too long. "Come in," I said finally. She stepped inside, looking around the house she once called home. Every photograph, every painting seemed to pull at her memories. When she saw the picture of her and Ethan on the mantel, taken on their honeymoon, her eyes glistened. "He never took it down?" she whispered. No, I said softly. He doesn't erase people. He just learns to live with the empty chair. 3. The box. She placed the small box on the table and opened it. Inside were old photographs, a silver bracelet, and a folded paper. These were his, she said. I kept them when I left. I thought they'd remind me of what he took from me, but they only reminded me of what I lost. I watched her hands tremble. Why bring them now? I asked. Because I'm leaving the city, she said. A job offer overseas. New start. But I couldn't go without returning what isn't mine anymore. Her voice broke on the last line. She took a deep breath, composing herself. Does he know you're here? I asked. She shook her head. No, and maybe he shouldn't. I just needed to do this. For peace. Before I could reply, footsteps came from the hallway. Ethan had come downstairs, phone in hand, unaware. When he saw her, he froze. For the collision. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Rain whispered against the windows. The clock ticked somewhere in the background, and every unspoken word between them filled the silence. Amelia, he said finally, his voice low. What are you doing here? She turned, tears already forming. I came to return these. She slid the box toward him. And to say goodbye, properly this time. He stared at the box, then at her. You already said goodbye the day you walked out. I know, she said. But I didn't mean it then. I was angry. This time I mean it. He looked away, jaw tight. You could have mailed it. I wanted to see your face one last time. Something in that honesty softened him. He sat down slowly, his hands clasped together. I read your letter, he said quietly. Dad gave it to me. Her eyes widened. You did. He nodded. It hurt, but it also helped. She exhaled shakily. Then maybe it did what it was meant to. 5. The conversation they never had. For the first time in months they talked. Not like enemies, not like lovers, but like two people who had walked through fire and survived on opposite sides. Amelia told him about therapy, about sleepless nights, about learning to forgive herself. Ethan told her about starting over, about the small accounting firm, about how he finally slept through the night without replaying arguments in his head. At one point she asked softly, Did you ever hate me? He thought for a long moment. No. I hated the silence that came after you left. I hated not knowing why. But hate you? No. I couldn't. Even when I tried. Tears slipped down her face. You deserved better. He smiled faintly. Maybe we both did. There was a long pause, and then he added, You know I kept waiting for you to come back. But after a while, I realized you already had. In every lesson I learned the hard way. She nodded, wiping her tears. And I kept waiting for you to call, so I could say sorry. But I think I needed to face the silence myself. 6. Closure. When she finally stood to leave, Ethan rose with her. The rain had stopped, and pale sunlight touched the edges of the clouds outside. Take care of yourself, he said. You too, she whispered. Then she hesitated, reached into her pocket, and handed him the silver bracelet. You gave me this on our first anniversary. I wore it every day, even after everything fell apart. It was a reminder that once we were good. He looked at it, then gently pushed it back toward her. Keep it. Let it remind you that we weren't perfect. But we tried. Their eyes met. No promises, no regrets, just quiet gratitude. She smiled through tears. Goodbye, Ethan. Goodbye, Amelia. She turned and walked to the door. As she stepped outside, the sunlight caught her face, and for the first time, she looked free. 7. After she left. For a long time, Ethan stood at the window watching her disappear down the street. Then he sighed, deep and steady, and turned to me. It's over, he said. I nodded. Yes, and that's okay. He smiled weakly. Funny. I thought the end would hurt more. Endings don't hurt, I said softly. Holding on does. He sat beside me quiet for a while. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, She looked different, lighter, because she finally forgave herself, I said. That's the hardest kind of forgiveness. He nodded slowly. Maybe now we both can start living again. 8. A letter for himself. That night I found him writing something at his desk. He folded the paper neatly and placed it in an envelope labeled To My Future Self. Curious, I asked, What's that? He smiled. A promise that I won't let pain make me bitter again. That I'll love again someday, but differently, wiser. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Your mother would have been proud. He looked at me with soft eyes. You stood by me when everyone left, Dad. I don't think I ever said thank you. You don't have to, I said. That's what fathers do. stand behind their sons until they can stand on their own. 9. Epilogue. 6 months later. Summer came. The garden bloomed. Laughter returned to the house. Ethan met new friends at work, started volunteering at a community center, and sometimes came home smelling of fresh paint from the art classes he helped run. One evening he came to me with a soft smile. "Dad, I think I met someone." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "She's a teacher. Kind. Not perfect, but real." I smiled. "That's all that matters." He looked toward the setting sun. "Do you think it's okay to move on?" "Yes, son," I said. "It's not moving on. It's moving forward." Later that night, I walked out to the porch, the same place where I had once watched him break down after court. The sky was painted gold and violet, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. I opened my old journal again and wrote, "Love doesn't always come back in the same form. Sometimes it returns as peace, as a lesson, as a quiet morning where nothing hurts anymore. Today my son found peace, and that's the happiest ending a father could ask for." As I closed the book, I looked toward the street where Amelia had once walked away and whispered into the breeze, "Thank you for loving him once." That was enough. Autumn arrived softly that year. The leaves painted the street with gold, and the chill in the air carried a strange sense of comfort, the kind that only comes after long pain. Our home, once haunted by silence and broken dreams, now hummed with quiet peace. Ethan was no longer the same man who had stood trembling in court months ago. His shoulders were straighter, his eyes calmer. He laughed again, not loudly but sincerely, like a man who had made peace with his past. I often caught him humming tunes while watering the plants or helping me fix the old fence. Life at last was beginning to look forward. But sometimes, peace has a way of bringing something new, something unexpected. 2. The chance encounter. It happened on a Sunday morning. Ethan had gone to the local community center to help with an art exhibit. He'd been volunteering there for months, teaching kids basic accounting, helping with donations, finding meaning in small things. That day, while hanging up paintings, he noticed a young woman struggling to carry a stack of frames through the doorway. She wore a paint-splattered apron, her hair tied back loosely, and her eyes, bright, curious, full of life, met his. "Need a hand?" Ethan offered. She laughed. "I need two, actually." He helped her balance the frames on the table, brushing dust off one corner. "You're the artist?" "Guilty," she said. "Lena, and you're—" "Ethan," he replied, smiling faintly. "Ah," she said, pointing at his name tag. "The finance guy who keeps the art folks out of trouble with numbers." He chuckled. "Someone has to." It was a simple moment, but simple moments have power. The quiet spark before a storm of change. The connection. Over the next few weeks, they crossed paths often. She painted. He balanced budgets. She teased him about being too serious, and he teased her about painting messes and calling them art. But beneath the light banter was something deeper, a slow unfolding warmth neither expected. One evening, after everyone had left, they stayed behind to clean up. The rain poured outside, drumming against the windows. Lena was sitting cross-legged on the floor, trying to fix a broken frame. "You know," she said, "people who fix things usually have something broken inside them." Ethan paused, the sound of rain filling the silence. "Maybe, or maybe they just know what it feels like to see something fall apart." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "You sound like someone who's been through a lot." He smiled gently. "Maybe too much." Lena didn't press. She just handed him a piece of string and said softly, "Then let's fix this one together." That was the night something shifted. Not love, not yet, but hope. 4. My view from the porch. I noticed the change. Ethan came home later, but lighter. He'd talk about this artist who can't stay serious for more than 2 minutes. And there was that glint in his eyes again, the one that disappeared after Amelia left. One evening I asked him, "She makes you smile, doesn't she?" He tried to hide the grin. "She's different. No expectations. No games, just honest." "Honesty's rare," I said. "Hold on to that." He nodded. "I'm trying, Dad, but I'm scared too." "Of being hurt again?" He exhaled slowly. "Of trusting again." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Trust isn't about being sure. It's about choosing to believe, even when you're not." 5. The painting. Weeks later, Lena invited Ethan to her studio. It was a small space filled with canvases, the smell of turpentine, and splashes of color on every surface. In the center stood a new painting, unfinished but powerful. It showed a man standing in the rain, holding pieces of a broken mirror. In the reflection, you could see 2 versions of his face, one wounded, one healing. Ethan stared at it for a long time. "It's about loss," she said quietly. "And how sometimes what breaks us also reveals who we really are." He swallowed hard. "It's beautiful." She smiled sadly. "It's not done yet. I'm still learning what healing looks like." He looked at her then, not the artist, but the woman, and said, "Maybe we can learn together." For the first time in years, his voice didn't carry pain, only sincerity. 6. The letter that found its way back. That night, after returning home, I found a letter in the mailbox addressed to Ethan. The handwriting was familiar, delicate, careful. It was from Amelia. I hesitated, then handed it to him. He read it silently. I watched his face shift. Surprise, sadness, peace. When he finished, he placed the letter on the table. "She's married," said softly, "to someone she met overseas. She wrote to thank me for forgiving her." He smiled faintly. "She said she hopes I've found happiness too." I studied him carefully. "And have you?" He thought for a moment. "I think I'm starting to." Then he folded the letter and put it in a drawer. The past belongs there, in a place you can open when you need to remember, but never live in again. 7. The festival. Winter arrived, bringing with it the annual Community Art Festival. The center buzzed with music, laughter, and lights. Lena's paintings were displayed at the entrance, and one of them, Reflections of Rain, caught everyone's eye. It was the finished version of the earlier painting. Now, the man no longer held broken glass. He stood under sunlight, his reflection whole, his expression peaceful. Ethan stood beside her as people admired it. "You finished it," he said. She smiled. "With a little help from someone who reminded me what hope looks like." When the announcer called her name for the Best New Artist award, she turned to Ethan, eyes glistening. "We did it." He laughed. "You did it." But she shook her head. "No, we both learned to begin again." 8. A Father's Prayer. That night, when Ethan returned home, I saw something in him I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Joy. Pure, effortless joy. He hugged me tight and said, "Dad, I'm okay now." I nodded, unable to speak. When he went to his room, I sat alone in the living room. Tears of gratitude welling in my eyes, I whispered to the heavens, "Thank you for breaking him, because it's how he learned to rebuild. Thank you for the storm, because it led him to the shore." 9. The New Beginning. Months later, spring came again. The garden bloomed, sunlight spilled into the kitchen, and laughter filled the house like music. Ethan and Lena walked together through the yard one afternoon, hand in hand. He pointed to a patch of flowers his mother once loved. "She said these always come back," he told her. Lena smiled. "Like hope." He looked at her, the woman who entered his life when everything seemed over, and said softly, for the first time, "I'm not afraid of tomorrow." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's because you finally let yesterday go." And I, standing at the window, watched them. Two souls who had walked through storms only to find each other in the sunlight. Sometimes the best love story isn't about who comes back. It's about who stays to build anew. 10. Final narration. There was a day my son walked into court, mocked and broken, while I followed behind him with nothing but faith. There was a day I feared I'd lose him. Not to death, but to despair. But today I see a man reborn, a heart restored, and a love that doesn't hurt anymore. Pain may change us, but it also purifies us. And when we rise from it, we rise stronger, softer, wiser. This is not the end of his story. It's the beginning of everything he was. The morning of change. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, painting the walls gold. I could hear the faint hum of Ethan's laughter in the kitchen, something that had become a part of my mornings lately. He was humming a tune, something cheerful, while the smell of coffee filled the air. It had been almost a year since that courtroom day. A year since I'd seen my son's life collapse, and then rebuild itself from the ashes. Now he stood taller, calmer, and happier. When I walked into the kitchen, he was standing by the counter, reading something, a letter, neatly folded, with a golden seal. "What's that, son?" I asked. He smiled slowly. "An invitation, Dad." I raised an eyebrow. "To what?" He handed it to me. The elegant handwriting read, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Amelia and Daniel Kingsley. Venue, the Old Oak Estate. Date, 10th March. My heart paused for a beat. Amelia, his ex-wife, the woman who once mocked him in court, the woman whose love had turned to venom and left him in pieces. And yet, there it was, a wedding invitation. To the letter attached. There was a smaller note attached inside the envelope. It wasn't part of the formal card. Just a personal letter written in familiar ink. Ethan, I know you may not want to come, but I needed you to know I'm happy, truly this time. I've thought about everything we went through, and I wanted you to see that something good came from all the pain. You helped me become the woman who can love again, kindly this time. I hope you found your peace too. Amelia. Ethan read it again, then folded it carefully. His eyes didn't carry bitterness, only quiet understanding. She's moved on, he said. And that's okay. I have too. I looked at him, searching his face. Will you go? He smiled faintly. No, I don't need to. Some chapters are better closed without revisiting. Then he looked toward the window, where sunlight spilled across the garden, and added softly, besides, I've already found what I was looking for. 3. A proposal in simplicity. A week later, Ethan took Lena to the same park where he used to walk alone after the court case. The lake shimmered under a setting sun. Birds skimmed across the surface, and laughter from nearby families floated through the air. He stopped near the old wooden bench, the one he had once sat on when everything felt lost. He turned to her and smiled. Do you know what this place means to me? He asked. She shook her head. Tell me. This is where I came when I thought my life was over. I sat here wondering why everything I loved had fallen apart. And now, he paused, taking her hands. Now I realize I was just waiting for the right person to walk into my life. Her eyes glistened. Ethan. He took a small box from his pocket and opened it. A simple silver ring. Elegant, no diamonds, just pure sincerity. I don't have fancy words, he said. But I know I want to. Spend the rest of my days making you laugh. Painting our lives with peace instead of pain. Will you marry me? Lena covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the lake caught the sunset just right, golden light reflecting on the water, like life itself was blessing the moment. 4. A father's heart. When Ethan told me, I tried to speak but my voice cracked. My heart was too full. Dad, he said softly, I know life hasn't been easy for either of us, but you stood by me when I couldn't stand it all. I want you to be my best man. I laughed through tears. Son, I've been your best man since the day you were born. We hugged, long, tight, and wordless. For years I had prayed for that very moment, to see him happy, free of guilt and pain. Now, that prayer had turned into reality. 5. The day of the wedding. The wedding took place in a small garden behind the art center. The same place where Ethan and Lena first met. No grandeur, no lavish decorations. Just close friends, soft music, white roses, and sunlight streaming through trees. Lena wore a pastel blue gown, her hair loose, her smile radiant. Ethan wore a simple gray suit that made him look every bit the man he had become. Calm, kind, complete. As I stood beside him before the ceremony, I whispered, She's beautiful. He smiled. So's peace, Dad. That's what this feels like. When Lena walked down the aisle, their eyes met, and in that look, I saw everything they had both lost and found. It wasn't just love, it was redemption. When the officiant said, You may now kiss the bride, the crowd cheered, and for a moment, I saw the boy I once held in my arms, smiling, innocent, unbroken again. 6. A familiar face, but life, with its strange sense of timing, had one more surprise. As the guests congratulated the couple, a woman approached from the side, elegant, composed, holding a small envelope. It was Amelia. For a brief second, the world seemed to slow. Ethan noticed her, surprise flickering across his face. She smiled softly and said, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to give you this. He hesitated, then nodded. You came. I wasn't planning to, she said, but when I heard it was at the art center, I thought maybe it was fate's way of letting me see you happy. She handed him the envelope. It's not a letter of apology. It's just closure. Ethan took it gently. Thank you. Amelia looked at Lena, smiled warmly, and said, He deserves everything good. Take care of him. Lena reached out and hugged her, a brief, unexpected moment of grace. Then Amelia turned and walked away into the fading light. No drama, no tears, just peace. The last letter. That night, after the celebrations, Ethan sat on the porch under the stars and opened the envelope. Inside was a single line written in Amelia's handwriting. Some love stories end so we can learn how to write better ones. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his wallet, not as a memory of pain, but as a reminder of how far he'd come. He looked up at the stars, then at Lena, who was laughing with my grandchildren-to-be, inside the house, and whispered, Thank you, Amelia, for the lesson. 8. A father's reflection. When I joined him on the porch, he smiled. You ever think life has a funny way of fixing itself? I chuckled. It doesn't fix itself, son. It fixes us. He nodded slowly. Yeah, it really does. We sat there in silence, the sounds of laughter floating through the night, the scent of roses in the air. My heart swelled with gratitude, not for the pain we'd endured, but for the strength it had carved into us. 9. Epilogue. The circle closes. Months later, a postcard arrived from overseas. It was from Amelia. It showed a sunrise over a quiet beach, and on the back, just 3 words. I'm finally free. I smiled as I read it and placed it in Ethan's old journal. The one that once carried his heartbreak and his healing. Now it held something else. Peace. 10. Final narration. I once feared my son would never recover from the pain of betrayal. But pain, I've learned, is just life's way of reshaping the soul. The courtroom that once mocked him became a memory that built him. And the woman who once broke him became a lesson that freed him. Now, when I see him holding hands with his wife beneath the same sun that once watched him cry, I realize this isn't the end of his story. It's the beginning of his legacy. Because sometimes God doesn't take you back to what you lost. He leads you to what you were meant to find. 15 years later. Time, they say, is the gentlest healer. 15 years had passed since that courtroom day. The day that nearly destroyed my son but ended up defining him. The city had changed. Buildings rose where old streets once stood. And the world seemed faster, louder, more distracted. But in one quiet corner stood a small art school. The Carter Foundation for Creative Healing. A place where children learned art, writing, and the language of resilience. It was Ethan's dream come to life. Now 46, he had grown into a man of quiet confidence. His hair carried streaks of silver. His eyes held stories that no words could capture. And his smile had that same calm that only those who have truly healed possess. And every morning, as I sat on the school porch with my cup of tea, I watched him walk through those gates with the same purpose that once led him into court. But now, it wasn't to fight. It was to build. 2. The father and the son. Dad! Ethan called one morning, his voice echoing down the hallway. He still called me that, even though my beard was now white and my hands trembled when I held my tea. Yes, son? I replied. He smiled, sitting beside me. The first batch of scholarships is ready. I named one after Mom. I nodded, heart swelling. She would have loved that. He chuckled softly. And another one after you. For students who never give up. I laughed. You don't have to. I do, he interrupted gently. Because I wouldn't be here if you hadn't walked behind me that day in court. My eyes blurred with tears. I remembered that moment vividly. The courtroom full of whispers. The judge's gavel, Amelia's sharp words, and my son broken but proud. When the judge saw me walking behind him, he paused, because in that instant, it wasn't just a man on trial. It was a son with his father's shadow standing in his defense. And that shadow had never left him. 3. The art of healing. The foundation had become a home for children who came from broken homes. Kids who had seen too much pain too young. Lena, Ethan's wife, taught painting and storytelling to them, helping them turn their pain into color. One afternoon, I watched a young girl paint a picture of a cracked heart stitched back, together with golden thread. Ethan knelt beside her and asked softly, "Why gold?" She smiled shyly. "Because when you fix something, it becomes more special." He blinked, remembering his own journey. "That's right," he said. "That's how I see life too." Later, as the children left, I found him sitting alone in the art room, staring at the same painting. "Reminds you of someone?" I teased. He smiled faintly. "Reminds me of who I used to be." The return of an old friend. A few months later, during an art exhibition at the foundation, a familiar face appeared among the guests. Amelia. Age had softened her. She carried herself with grace, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes gentle instead of proud. She had come not as a ghost from the past, but as a woman who had made peace with her mistakes. Ethan noticed her before I did. For a moment, the years melted away, and it was as if time had folded back to that courtroom. Only this time, there were no chains of resentment between them. "Amelia," he said, walking up to her. "You came." She smiled warmly. "Of course. I wanted to see what forgiveness builds." She looked around at the children's artwork, her voice soft. "You've turned pain into something beautiful, Ethan. I'm proud of you." He nodded. "And I'm happy you found peace." There was no tension, no unfinished business, just mutual understanding. She handed him a small wrapped gift. "It's a book, she said. "The one we once talked about reading together. The Art of Letting Go. I thought it was time you actually had it." He smiled and hugged her gently. "Thank you," he whispered, "for closing the story the right way." 5. Lessons for the next generation. That evening, Lena joined us for dinner. Their daughter, Clara, sat at the table sketching in her notebook, a habit she inherited from her mother. "Dad," she said suddenly, "is it true you went to court because someone hurt you?" The room fell quiet. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, but that's not the important part." "What's important then?" she asked. "That I forgave," he said. "Because forgiveness doesn't excuse what someone did. It just stops their pain from living inside you." Clara tilted her head. "Did it work?" He smiled softly. "You're sitting here, aren't you? So yes, it worked." Lena reached over and squeezed his hand. I watched the exchange silently, knowing that the lessons of the past had now become the inheritance of the future. The final speech. A year later, Ethan was invited to speak at a conference titled Healing Through Forgiveness. The hall was filled with people, survivors, families, and strangers who had carried years of quiet suffering. When Ethan walked onto the stage, he didn't carry notes, just truth. He began, 15 years ago I walked into a courtroom believing my life was over. I was mocked, humiliated, and left with nothing but a shadow of who I used to be. But behind me stood my father. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His presence reminded me that even when the world stops believing in you, love can still stand tall." The audience fell silent. He continued, "Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to the one who hurt you. It's a gift you give to yourself. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over poison. And if my story teaches anything, it's this. Sometimes the things that break you are the very things that build your strength." By the time he finished, the hall was filled with applause. Not for fame, but for truth. Lena wiped her eyes. I stood quietly at the back, my heart swelling with pride so deep it hurt. 7. The Last Walk. That night, after the event, we walked together outside under the soft city lights. He supported me now. Time had turned the protector into the one who needed protection. "Dad," he said quietly, "you were there when I fell. And you stayed until I could stand again." I smiled, my voice weak but certain. "And now you stand for others. That's what I prayed for." We walked in silence, our shadows stretching long across the pavement. I thought of that courtroom years ago, the trembling, the anger, the humiliation, and now here we were, walking out of another building, hand in hand, in peace. Sometimes life gives you circles, not straight lines. You start in pain, travel through healing, and end in gratitude. 8. The letter I left him. A few months later, as my health began to fade, I wrote Ethan one final letter. I knew my time was near, and I wanted my words to stay long after I was gone. "My dear son, the world will remember you not for the pain you endured, but for the strength you showed when it tried to break you. I followed you once into a courtroom to protect you. Now you walk into hearts to protect others. That is your legacy: forgiveness, compassion, and courage. When you miss me, don't look for me in pictures. Look for me in every child you help, every person you forgive, and every morning you wake up grateful for another chance. Because that's where I'll be. Love, Dad." 9. The legacy continues. Years later, the foundation grew into a global movement. Ethan's story inspired thousands. It became a message taught in schools, shared in churches, whispered between fathers and sons trying to heal their own wounds. And on the anniversary of my passing, Ethan stood under the old oak tree behind the foundation, the same spot where his journey had truly begun. His daughter Clara, now grown, stood beside him holding a sketchbook. "Dad," she said softly, "I drew something for Grandpa." He looked. It was a drawing of two figures walking into a courtroom, one younger, one older. Beneath it she had written, "Behind every strong son, there was once a father who believed." Tears filled Ethan's eyes. He looked toward the sky and whispered, "You still walk with me, Dad." And I did, always. 10. Final narration. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It rewrites its meaning. My son learned that pain doesn't define us. What we do with it does. He took the ashes of humiliation and built a home for healing. He taught that no matter how deep the wound, love can still grow there. And though I'm gone now, my shadow still follows him. Not behind, but beside. Because true strength is not in how loudly we fight our battles, but in how quietly we choose peace afterward.